Welcome to the 100 Club. I'm Tom, that is Rich, and it is less than 24 hours since we released a video of retention rumours for the 100 2022. And lo and behold, as soon as we do that, they only go and announce the official retention lists. Rich, have you been following the developments throughout the day?
I have, Tom. I was very interested to see how much of it we got right and which bits we got wrong. And I'm glad to say that we mostly got it right before, but it's nice that we have the proper retention list in front of us now, so we can start to see how the tournament's going to shape up.
We certainly can. We can, and I will pull those up onto screen in a moment. But if you are new here, this should be treated as your go-to source for news about the 100. We've released videos as and when we can. So if you like this sort of thing, then give us a subscribe. It'd be much appreciated. And if you like a podcast, then feel free to join us. Find us on your average podcast provider. But you're going to miss out on the screen display that I'm going to show up now. So it's filled out quite a lot, I think, from retentions. But at the same time, there's a huge number of questions have been raised, I think. I suppose the first one is there's 3 teams that haven't picked any, or retained rather, any overseas players at this point. Do you agree with that strategy?
I think it depends on how successful you were last season. Okay. I think some of the teams have decided that last year was an experiment and it didn't quite work out and they want to have another go.
Absolutely. So Trent Rockets and Southern Brave, who are in the top 3, have only given themselves 4 draft picks as we go forward to the draft, which is on the 30th of March this year. Welsh Fire, pretty much 7th out of 8, 7 draft picks. So they are having a rebuild, 6 draft picks with the Spirit. I get that.
The mitigating circumstances are before the first edition of the 100 last year, there was a lot of churn in terms of the squads due to COVID. So players that had originally signed up, the likes of David Warner, Glenn Maxwell, ultimately didn't come across to play in the tournament. David Warner was not retained by the Southern Brave. Glenn Maxwell has been by the London Spirit. And I think just that ability to draft more in terms of overseas players makes sense for teams to keep their slots clear if they weren't particularly happy with whoever they had last year. Although I would caveat that with, you look at the likes of the Welsh Fire. They had Glenn Phillips last year, who was their leading run scorer. So a little bit surprised maybe not to see him brought back in. But no, they've obviously decided to go in a different direction.
Yeah. One thing that every team has done is it's left a pick available at 125k. So the first round pick for each of those teams is still there. So we are going to see some pretty big names appear, I think, in the draft on the 30th of March, right?
Yeah, so the way this works is the top line, and apologies again for those listening on the podcast, the top line is centrally contracted players. So these are England players with Test or Red Bull contracts, and they get allocated amongst the teams without a draft. Now, we had speculated about whether some of these players move around a little bit, but they have more or less gone back to where they were for the first edition. Then there's 14 slots below that each, and there's two slots at each price band, which go from 125,000 all the way down to 30,000 at the lowest. And as Tom, as you rightly point out, each of the team has kept at least one 125,000 point free, and the Spirit, the Fire, and the Originals all have both of their top paid slots free, so they can pick 2 players at each of those positions. The other 5 teams just one.
Yeah, just on the England contracted, clearly some of the teams have got 2 centrally contracted players. They just get an extra squad player, as far as I can see, but clearly that will be of less use to them for sort of the mid to late period of the tournament, when there could be some clash with the South Africa Test series that we're anticipating. The other thing they were meant to do, Rich, was retain or leave a space free at £30,000 in order to recruit a Vitality wildcard draft pick in June. And it appears that London Spirit, Manchester Originals, and Oval Invincibles didn't get that brief at all, because they've just kept last year's Vitality wildcard picks in Blake Cullen, Fred Klassen, and Jordan Cox. What's going on?
Well, it's the 3 teams with Australian coaches have not understood the rules. They would appear.
So they haven't been told.
So the letter to Shane Warne, Simon Katic, and Tom Moody Well, to be fair to them, they've been very busy with the IPL mega auction, so they can't possibly.
Not Shane Warne hasn't.
Oh, no, well, he's got other things on. He's a busy man.
Yeah. Well, it didn't go so well for Simon Katic, but that's a different story. So what we think is they're going to have to either pay more for their wildcard draft pick, or there's going to be some sort of agreement to, I don't know how they're going to move someone else up into a higher pay bracket, and then the wildcard pick will come in at 30. They will have to take one.
Yeah, let's not worry too much about the 16th squad player, shall we?
Okay, well, let's have a look at each of the squads by turn then.
How good is he at carrying drinks? That's what we want to know for the 16th spot.
You know there'll be some surprising players out there. Who is this year's Chris Benjamin, for instance? But let's have a look at the squads in turn. London Spirit. I think the big surprise for me is, yes, they've released all of their overseas players, but they've taken back Glenn Maxwell. But they didn't keep Josh Inglis. Why not, Rich?
I'm not really sure, Tom. Inglis had a fairly good season for them. And there's still, obviously, one thing we should bear in mind is that there's still a possibility that each of these players could get redrafted by these teams. They don't necessarily have to be retained by them. They also have a right to match option for players, which means that if one of their players they released gets signed by another club, providing they have that slot free, they are able to match it. So my understanding is if for instance, the Southern Brave were to take Josh Inglis at 125,000, then the Spirit would have the option to match it because they have that second slot free. So they do still have the option to have him should they want to keep him.
Okay. Another name that they might have a look at, maybe perhaps in a slightly lower price bracket, someone like David Visa, who played pretty well when he came in last year as well. Otherwise, plenty of work to do, but they've got some balance there, so we'll see how they get on. Welsh Fire, then. What do you think? Again, released all of their overseas players.
Yeah, decided to start again. They struggled mightily last year, both in terms of not getting the original raft of overseas players in. I mean, they were talking about building the team around Kyron Pollard, and then there was talk of he would play half the tournament. So they had Jimmy Neesham came in, he was going to play a couple of the games, and then Pollard never came at all. Neesham played a little bit more. So they've obviously decided let's just start again, because we banked on one strategy last year, and if the star overseas player doesn't come, then the whole thing doesn't work. Yeah. So maybe they're going to go for a bit more of domestic focus. I mean, they're picking number 2. Perhaps Joe Clark will still be on the board at that point. The young Notts opener. Yeah. One thing that I find quite interesting when I look at the makeup of the draft picks here is compare London Spirit and Welsh Fire with, say, Oval Invincibles. Oval Invincibles still have 6 spots left, but they're all at the latter half of their.
Very bottom heavy.
They basically kept the nucleus of the side on the highest salary, and they'll be looking to pad out with sort of cheaper, younger players. Whereas the Fire, the Spirit, and the Originals, they've got their picks, in those higher price range. So they're really going to be loading up on either domestic talent or overseas stars. Where does Tom Banton go, Tom?
I think they might take him back, to be honest. That's kind of what I would like to see them do. I don't think he was dreadful last year. He wasn't on his best, certainly. I also think they might have another look at Kais Ahmed. I think he was decent last year, so could be one of those overseas points. Let's have a look at the Manchester Originals then. Clearly, Ollie Robinson has moved up into an England slot, which makes a hole for them. But again, none of the overseas players returned. Carlos Brathwaite goes, who was captaining last year. Lockie Ferguson, Colin Munro also had some decent efforts. Pretty similar to the Welsh Fire.
Yeah, I mean, there's always this issue between white ball and red ball cricket. Quite a lot of it depends on what happens with the Test side and Josh Buttler. Butler,
or Johnny Bairstow for the Welsh Fire.
Exactly, that's that thing. Yeah. Whoever's keeping for England, takes away from the Welsh Fire the Originals. If Butler plays the whole season, then obviously he's the obvious candidate to captain, keep wicket, and open the batting. And then at that point, he probably opens with Phil Salt, and then you've got the sort of then you're looking at sort of, you can use those 225 slots and 100 slots on some big hitting overseas stars, and maybe bring in a big bowler as well. I mean, they had Shadab Khan last year as their overseas player, who again couldn't make it because of the I think he had conflicting interests. Could they get somebody like him again? One thing to bear in mind is the international calendar is incredibly packed, and not all countries will be able to release players for the 100 this year.
Yeah.
Nick Poran's another interesting one. Tom.
Yeah.
They had him on the books last year. He just had to come off a very good little series in T20s in India. I think he's sort of had three consecutive half centuries. So I think if he declares for the draft, he'll certainly be getting some interest.
Yeah, he's starting to get rid of that sort of inconsistent tag just about now at the age of 23. Would definitely be in the mix, I think, for selection.
Yeah, I think.
Go on.
He after I declared him to be too inconsistent, he replied with 3 consecutive half centuries. Although didn't get the team home, did you, Nick?
No, but he has picked up a big IPL contract, so maybe that'll knock him into some form for the 100. Moving on then to the Northern Superchargers, they've kept Faf du Plessis, which is clearly a big gain for them. Didn't play much last year due to concussion, and they've got a really decent spine there. Ben Stokes, Adil Rashid, Harry Brook, David Willey. Where would you like to see some improvement?
Well, I think probably in the pace bowling.
Okay.
I think maybe they look, some genuine pace there. Perhaps is a bit light. Who could they go for there? I mean, maybe the likes of sort of a Kagiso Rabada, perhaps. If he makes himself available, could be interesting. Also,
Wahab Riaz, maybe someone like that.
Yeah, something like that, and maybe to open the batting, Quinton de Kock will be available. Maybe he can fill that 125 slot. So I think that's. But again, as I agree with you, I like it's their middle order looks pretty strong. I mean, they were only team to hit 200 last year. And Harry Brook, this is the summer for him to kick on, right, and really sort of announce himself as the heir apparent to a slot in the England middle order.
Yeah, I don't think they'll bring back either Mujibur Rahman or Chris Lynn personally, but we'll see. There are options out there. On the Oval Invincibles, again, no overseas players there, so that's the likes of Sunil Narine, Tabraiz Shamsi, Colin Ingram. But as you say, they filled themselves up at the top with some fairly big names, some experienced, good pros up there. Jason Roy, Sam Bennings, Tom Curran, the Curran brothers, in fact, Sak Mahmood in good form. What are they going to do with the overseas situation then?
I think it's an interesting one because you're right. They have 3 overseas slots, but they're also relatively lower value, with the exception of that 125 pick. Does that mean they go associate nation with some of those lower ones? They did try and get Sandeep Lamacheng in the last round.
Like to see him back.
Could they try and get him back in? Home office permitting. Maybe sort of some of the Afghan talent we've seen recently. Maybe Mujib ends up there, or Case Ahmed if the Welsh Fire don't take him back. He could probably do a job at that slot as well. Yeah,
or you might see someone like Paul Sterling, who's fallen out of the Southern Braves setup. Did really well for them last year, though.
Yeah.
Moving on then to the big 3, as they were last year. Trent Rockets, pretty similar. They've only given themselves 4 draft picks as it stands. And Rashid Khan, the big name, obviously retained. Marchand Delanga stick there, along with that Nottinghamshire core that they really have used to great success. I suppose the question is probably not Darcy Short on the draft, you would think. And if so, who else might they take with the 125k?
I think they will look to replace Darcy Short. They'll go with an overseas bat of some description. But we'll need to see who declares himself, available for the draft coming up on 30th of March. But for me, that's probably an overseas opening bat.
Yeah,
maybe Quinton de Kock, maybe David Warner if he makes himself available.
Yeah, I think that they're a good shout. David Warner is the name I had in my head, but we'll see. Birmingham Phoenix wise, they've retained Adam Milne, who we had a great chat with last year, of course. Imran Tahir, though, not returning despite his hat-trick heroics, and will be spared Dom Sibley. I know you'll be very sad about that, Rich.
Well, we don't know that. Dom Sibley could get drafted.
He could, but he won't.
Never say never. Who knows what the Phoenix will come up with? I know that. We had a good chat with their strategist Dan Weston before last year's tournament. He's a big proponent of boundary hitters, players with power, players who can find the rope variety. So it'll be somebody from that ilk that they'll be going for. Be interesting to see. Picking down at 7, they might have to sort of readjust their strategy a little bit depending on who's still on the board down there.
Well, they could turn the 9 players that they've got out right now and do quite well, I think. So yeah, some fine tuning, I'll call that one, as is the case for the Southern Brave. They appear to have a strategy that looks like selecting people that the England selectors won't pick, which is pretty safe as a selection theory. If because if England are picking them, they can't be any good, right?
I think the strategy is more or less we won the tournament last year, so let's pick the same team and do it again.
I am, of course, being harsh as well on some players who have actually had good success for England, but not in the Red Bull game.
And God bless Tim David, because he's got enough money from the IPL. He'll take 50 grand to come and hang out in Hampshire for a month.
Very pleasant it will be too.
He doesn't need any more. That's enough for Tim.
Yeah.
Good on him.
So, I mean, I don't know quite how they managed it last year, but they seem to have an ever-ending list of overseas players on the books at some point. Colin de Grantom, Andre Russell, Devon Conway, Quinton de Kock, Paul Sterling. We'll see, actually, though, Marcus Stoinis back and Tim David. But, are they going to just turn to Quinton de Kock again?
I think they would like a left-handed opener.
Okay.
So we'll see. But, I mean, that was their strategy, wasn't it, all the way through? And whoever got injured got simply replaced with like for like. So I think if they don't get de Kock, then Conway could work as a replacement, and I think they could probably get Conway at 50.
Yeah. Well, I expect he'll be in the country, doing his thing. So he's a good option. He's a great option, really. And we'll, fingers crossed, hope to see some of Joffa in that green uniform as well, doing what he does best, which is bowling very, very fast.
And the nice thing the Brave have is, because they have such a settled side and they were so successful last year, those 2 bottom slots, they're really a flyer. They can afford to pick some exciting youngsters, give them a taste of the tournament, and not even really think about using them in 2022, but beyond. I'd imagine the likes of Archie Lennon might end up there again. He had a little spell with the club last year, and I think they might bring him back in again.
Yeah, I had a good breakthrough season last year. But another one who can build throughout 2022, definitely. Rich, any sort of closing thoughts on where we're going to go now up to the draft on the 30th of March? Who are you excited for?
I'm excited to see which overseas stars make themselves available for the draft. I know that the international calendar is so busy. I would like to see a variety from that throughout the cricketing world, not just sort of Aussies and Kiwis. I'd like to see players from the subcontinent making themselves available. We'll have Riaz in last year's edition, but I'd like to see some more of the Pakistan team if they could make it. And the Sri Lanka, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, love to see some of those guys as well. So I think the key thing is, let's keep our ears peeled, our eyes peeled, maybe, and our ears open.
It's late.
And we will be back to preview that draft and maybe even do a mock draft. What do you think, Tom?
I think we probably should do that, Rich. In the meantime, if you've got some good ideas about how you'd like your team to build itself up when it comes to the draft and what you think about those retentions generally, let us know in the comments down below. We'd love to hear from you. We can find us on Instagram, on Facebook as well. Links all down in the description. And make sure, please, just to hit that like, hit that subscribe, and do us a favour as we will continue to follow this tournament as we head towards its start in early August. Rich, it's been a pleasure.
Cheers, Tom.
Have a great night.